French culture has many faux pas, like using the wrong cheese knife or trimming your mustache below the government-mandated length. But there's one taboo you might not know about: talking about la race. According to a recent survey, 1 in 3 French people think that race does not exist. The word race is so controversial in France that lawmakers voted unanimously to remove it from their constitution. But it's not just the word itself that causes a stir. In fact, there are no official racial demographics in France because it is illegal for the government to ask you for your race in the census. In this video, I will explain how race became so taboo in France, how French people talk about race nowadays, and how the French concept of race interacts with the American one. To understand how things got this way, we first need to focus on 2 stories. One about how race has changed, and another about how Frenchness has changed. Let's start with race. Race means something different in France than in the US. And when I say this, I don't mean that racial demographics are different, or even that the history of racism is different. No. On an even more basic level, the English word race does not have a direct translation into French. To see why, you need to look back at the history of the word. In the mid-1800s, Europe exploded into contentious debate around one question: where do the different races come from? It was the biggest dispute in Europe since the Eurovision fiasco of 1452. There were 2 competing theories about the origin of race. One theory was that humans of all races share one common origin and are all a part of the same species, a theory known as monogenism. This is basically what we believe today. The second theory held that each race had a different origin and was its own subspecies of human, and this idea came to be known as polygenism. While countries like England were strong advocates for monogenism, French scholars wholly supported polygenism. In fact, even when Darwin's theory of evolution began disproving polygenism across the scientific world, the French people didn't budge. So why were the French so adamant that different races had different origins? Well, the answer has less to do with biology and more with politics. For one thing, the French Revolution was a reaction against the church, and they still had beef, or boeuf, as the French would say. So if the Bible claims that there was one origin for all of humans, well, the French had to say the opposite. But even more than this, the 19th century marked a period of rapid colonization for France, especially in Western and Northern Africa. And the whole colonizing thing feels a bit less fun if you realize that you're conquering, real people. Luckily, polygenism reassured the French that the oppressor must be essentially different from the oppressed. They could reconcile the cognitive dissonance that comes from dominating other people while insisting on universal human rights. Like fidget spinners and silly bands, polygenism eventually fell out of fashion. But all those decades of using la race to refer to different subspecies of human had already carved a deep linguistic scar in the French language, one that can still be seen today. But before we get to that, there is another dimension of French culture that is integral to understanding la race, one that is even more controversial. Are people of color treated equally in France? Well, it depends on what equal means. Modern French ideas of equality stem from all the way back to the French Revolution. Before this revolution, French society was designed to be unequal. The people were split into 3 categories called estates, and depending on which estate they were in, they had different legal rights and privileges. But the radical Enlightenment thinkers proposed the idea that no one group should have special privileges. Everyone should be equal under the law. This set the stage for one of the biggest political upheavals in all of history, the French Revolution. The French people dethroned the monarchy and chopped off a few heads, and from then on, equality would become one of the pillars of modern French society. And when I say equality here, it specifically means that no one group is given special privileges. This understanding of equality is a double-edged sword. Sure, it means that one group cannot take all the power for themselves, but at the same time, it means that groups that are already treated differently cannot receive the extra help they would need to actually have the same opportunities. This isn't an issue if you live in a homogeneous society, but after the Second World War, diversity became something that the French could no longer ignore. Once France's colonial empire began to crumble, they began to accept immigrants from these old colonies in northern and western Africa. When these formerly colonized people migrated to France, they turned into a visible minority. As a result, France had an identity crisis. Were they a superior civilizing master, or a republic based on tolerance and equality for all? With the demographic makeup of France changing at a rapid pace, the difference was unwelcome, and slowly, the discourse began to switch from "they are not like us" to "they choose to not be like us." They say a ghost can't move on if it still has unfinished business, and nowhere is this more true than with the ghosts of France's colonial past. Even nowadays, the word race still holds a connotation of a different subspecies or breed of human. Children learn that referring to race only creates unnecessary divisions between people, that we are not different races but one race, the human race. In other words, a good citizen is colorblind and treats everyone the same. Instead of race, the French talk about ethnicity. Your identity is linked more to your national origin than to skin color. If you take 3 white people from different European countries, that group will be considered diverse because the cultures are different. However, a multiracial friend group from one neighborhood in Lyon isn't considered all that diverse because they have the same upbringing. But this idea starts to be not so useful when it comes to acknowledging discrimination based on skin color. Even those French people who are overtly biased against Algerians and Moroccans don't think of that bias as being against their race, but against their culture. Not that it really makes it any better. But most French people aren't overtly discriminatory. Instead, the conversation turns to assimilation. Should these immigrants adopt a 100% French lifestyle? If you're a French person who grew up saying "our ancestors the Gauls," then the answer is yes. To them, this is a nation based on French people, and will even be so kind as to give you the exact same legal status and not even think about your difference. But there is one condition. If you want to be treated French, you have to act the part, and the rest of the country is your audience. To quote a Mr. Canute, whose parents moved to France from Mali, "Here they want us to melt into a single body and put aside our cultural diversity." Perhaps the most notorious example of this assimilation mindset came in 2004. In France's push to remove religion from public spaces, they implemented a school conspicuous religious signs ban that wasn't seen as targeting any one specific group, but which, in practice, affected only Muslim women and their wearing of hijabs. So yes, this law is technically equal in the French sense of the term, but in practice, one group is clearly affected in a disproportionate way. But if you think the solution lies simply in reforming race to reflect the Anglo-Saxon understanding of the word, you're still missing a key part of the discussion. France has a love-hate relationship with the USA. Because of the cultural reach of American media, French people are familiar with America, even fascinated by it. And how could you blame them with le baseball and le hot dog and your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? But this familiarity often comes with a reactionary feeling of national pride, a desire to protect French culture and language from foreign influence. Many American ideas raise up a million French red flags concerning cultural imperialism. Never mind the irony. The same goes for race. The US has been a diverse place since its foundation, and unlike France, the US tends to recognize this diversity as a part of its essence, even if the country doesn't always live up to the mythology of the great American melting pot. At the very least, the United States has had at least a century's head start on discussions surrounding diversity. Remember, while the USA had been going through its civil rights movement, France was just starting to learn how to live with diversity. Over time, America has developed language to promote multiculturalism, such as hyphenated identities. I am African American, Asian American, etc. These different groups have grown to identify strongly with these multicultural labels, and have used these labels to fight for rights and political power. This is called identity politics. And even if this idea is intuitive to Americans, the same doesn't apply to the rest of the world. Much like spray cheese and deep-fried butter, identity politics is an American thing that does not export well into France. When people in France try to group themselves or others based on labels like race, they're often met with the pejorative term communautariste. You see, these hyphenated identities are antithetical to the French view of equality. You can be African American, but you can't be Afro-French. That's setting yourself off from the rest of the country. Not only are these ideas not French, but there's something that's even worse: American. For an example, let's go back to 2018, the year of Tide Pods, Yanny, Laurel, and the 2018 World Cup. France made it all the way to the World Cup finals and won, but when the Americans saw the makeup of the team, they started joking that the real victory was for Africa. Of course, French people took offense to this, but even more than that, the players themselves were offended. They said that they felt like they were being stripped of their Frenchness, even though they grew up there. So if it wasn't hard enough for France to overcome linguistic and ideological barriers, they are in a cultural divide that disregards what some might consider to be essential in discussions about racism. So why doesn't race exist in France? Well, the answer is masked in some good intentions. After all, if we lived in a world where everyone already had equal rights, then inventing arbitrary categories such as black and white would only serve to cause divisions. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where those categories were already invented a long time ago by people like the French, and then perpetuated by people like the Americans. And your appearance still plays a role in the opportunities you have. Choosing to talk about race is not meant to further divide people, but to recognize the ways in which we already divide each other. You can't tear down the three estates if you don't acknowledge them. Now, if you're not French, it could be easy to come out of this video thinking, I knew it, those darn French are so backwards, but that would be missing the point. I find this to be a very important case study into how difficult it will be to promote anti-racism on a global scale. Each culture brings to the table their own set of culturally specific ideas and histories and terminologies surrounding discrimination. It may not just be as simple as nudging other countries towards 100% all-American identity politics. That might just end up being counterproductive, especially when you literally lack the shared vocabulary to discuss these ideas. So the question looms: how should France go about addressing issues of race? I'm not French, and this is outside of the scope of this video, but I'd be interested to hear what you think in the comments concerning how to continue these discussions. After all, the future of France depends on this very question. If you enjoyed the video and want to be notified when I make new content, you can subscribe to the channel for free and like the video so that more people can find it. The best way to support my work is through my Patreon page. You can set up a monthly donation, which I put directly back into the videos to put more time on them, help with the production quality, and in return, you get access to exclusive content, such as the ability to see these videos early before anyone else. It would really mean a lot to me, and it goes a long way to support thoughtful online content, so thank you.